Every night, we willingly sever our connection to the external world. We close our eyes, lose our sense of self, and drift into a span of time where our physical surroundings effectively cease to exist. From the outside, the body appears dormant. The senses stop responding to sights and sounds. Inside the skull, however, the brain remains in a state of intense, calculated activity. We have mapped the observable universe and tracked the behavior of billions of individual neurons, yet recording the subjective experience of where the mind goes during these offline hours has proven difficult to quantify using standard instruments. Understanding what happens while we are disconnected from physical reality requires an examination of the precise neurological mechanics running in the background. Sleep follows a rigid biphasic structure, alternating between periods of systemic maintenance and phases of complex cognitive simulation. The first major phase is deep sleep, the biological baseline where awareness retreats and the mind enters a state of absolute silence. The second phase is REM, or rapid eye movement sleep, characterized by the brain powering up to construct vivid, active dream states. These two states sit at opposite ends of the neurological spectrum. One involves the absolute cessation of experience, while the other generates a hyperactive hallucination that the mind accepts as real. Historically, these extremes of consciousness were explained through the lenses of philosophy and myth, with thinkers viewing the dreamless state as a kind of temporary annihilation. To see how the brain actually reconstructs reality, we must use modern neuroscience to examine the lowest energy state of the human mind. Deep sleep is defined by the delta wave state, the most restorative mode of the human nervous system. In this state, the brain's electrical rhythm slows to a pulse of less than 4 cycles per second. During this rhythm, the body executes critical maintenance. The nervous system resets, tissues heal, and the brain consolidates memories, locking data nodes into place for long-term storage. These maintenance tasks require nearly all of the brain's processing power, necessitating a complete diversion of energy away from the networks that produce conscious thought. Because the active mind is essentially turned off, this systemic cooldown results in a state entirely free of fear, desire, or suffering. Deep sleep serves as a nightly biological ground zero, a necessary period of non-being required for physical survival. The subjective result of the delta state is a total void where experience itself ceases to exist. With sensory networks inactive, the mental frameworks for space, time, and personal identity disappear. This creates the illusion of continuity. You fall asleep and wake up as if only a moment passed, despite hours elapsing in between. This state presents a biological paradox, an organism that exists without any awareness of its own being. Before the brain can simulate a new reality for the coming day, it must first return to this foundational, empty baseline. Once the restorative biological work of deep sleep is finally complete, the brain abruptly transitions into REM sleep. Physiologically, the body remains in a state of total paralysis, with muscle activity locked down. While the body stays motionless, the internal brain spikes in activity, firing with the same intensity seen during waking life. Although external senses are disconnected, the brain's visual and emotional centers begin to fire rapidly. The biological focus has now moved from physical healing to cognitive exploration and the processing of symbolic narratives. Without the constraints of external physical laws, the mind is free to navigate spaces and events generated entirely from within. The brain has established a closed biological loop, severing its link to the outside world to generate a reality of its own. To build the immersive environment of a dream, the brain utilizes a process known as memory alchemy. The brain takes fragments of faces, locations, and data consolidated during the previous phase and begins pulling them together. These disconnected memories are stitched together into a cohesive narrative and a detailed three-dimensional environment. Historical interpretations by Sigmund Freud viewed these scenes as windows into the unconscious. Modern science sees them as byproducts of a biological simulation. In this state, the mind plays a dual role, acting first as the creator and physics engine that defines the rules of the world. Simultaneously, it acts as the inhabitant, the character wandering through a world it does not realize it is building in real time. The system successfully hides its own architecture from the conscious observer, allowing the dream to feel remarkably solid. Because the brain accepts the simulation as real, it triggers genuine physical reactions, from a racing heart to a surge of adrenaline. Dreams function as the brain's proof of concept, the demonstration of its ability to operate as a fully contained reality rendering engine in total isolation. When you eventually wake, external sensory inputs are turned back on, flooding the system with new data. Waking life utilizes the same reality-constructing networks that run during REM sleep. The brain processes billions of chaotic signals each second, translating raw electrical pulses into an interpreted model of a three-dimensional environment. This rendering process is structurally identical to the one used in dreams. The primary difference is the presence of external sensory feedback to ground the simulation in a shared reality. Waking life acts as a persistent, sensory-tethered version of the same reality engine that generates the dreaming world. The complete offline cycle manages a transition from the absolute biological void of deep sleep to the hyperactive simulation of dreaming. This cycle proves that the brain systematically dismantles our sense of self every night, allowing the structure of the ego to dissolve into the dark. It then gathers those floating fragments and rebuilds our identity and our world anew before we ever open our eyes. Our capacity to experience the world tomorrow is entirely dependent on these foundational processes of healing and memory consolidation. The mechanics of offline awareness demonstrate that our perception of reality is a daily biological construction, assembled piece by piece in the dark.